wow, what an audience. We were saying we're happy not to be on the front lawn and in front of about 1,000 people, but I think we've got about 1,000 people here. So thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for that very generous introduction. First, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to be sitting here with Barnaby, because we're very rarely together. We're usually buried deep in different books in different countries. I am quite often buried in wars or sort of lost in wars, or we're on the road going to different places. So I don't often see Barnaby, but whenever I do, I would say that my faith is restored in humanity, in civilization. He's one of those sort of humane people. I partly say this because you've escaped the bonds of academia, if that makes sense.
I was never invited.
I'm a late arrival in academia, and I can completely see the advantages of being free from professorships and that kind of thing, being a free thinker. And that's what Barnaby is. And he's also a champion, as well as championing independent scholarship. He champions independent publishing. And if you're at all interested in travel literature of any sort from any era, you can find your favorite books are probably published by Barnaby at Eland Publishing. And he somehow manages to do it and yet remain a gentleman.
We're worried about this term in England. It normally means you're very bad at business.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that, I'm not using the word gentlemanly publisher in a derogatory fashion, or amateur. I would use the word amateur in the very best sense, meaning its old sense of being a lover of what you do. And if you look at the backlist, Eland's backlist, there are people you will all have heard of, like E.M. Forster and Winston Churchill even. But there are some unsung greats, people like Dorene Ingrams, who probably very few, or if any of you, have heard of her, but I would vote for her as the finest and the most doughty and the most interesting and most sympathetic foreign female traveller in the Arab world.
It's always embarrassing being British. You have to apologize all over the world, especially in Ireland and in India, for all our crimes for many hundreds of years. But when you meet people like Dorene, you realize there can be two flows in operation. Dorene trained as an actress, and she was picked up and fell in love with a man who became an administrator in South Yemen. And she became a radical Arabist of her time, adopted a Yemeni girl to join her own on the pack. And she and her husband just traveled amongst the people, sorting out over cups of tea tribal feuds. And then in retirement, although we're not going to talk about the Levant the whole time, wrote the first look at the problem of Palestine, Palestine Papers, as a sort of act of early historical love.
Yes. She was a lovely lady. I had the pleasure of showing her around Sana'a and trying to discover where she had stayed in 1940 something as a guest of the Imam. I know she said that she would go along on her camel through the deserts of Yemen. Is that better? She would go along on her camel through the deserts of Yemen, reciting Shakespeare. Isn't that a beautiful image? And so, yeah, that's Dorene. It's worth having a little aside on her. But you've also published your great love affairs, Norman Lewis, Dervla Murphy, Jonathan Rabin. You know, any of us who have written anything like travel or travel history, these are the greats.
So what we love is internationalists who really care for the world, but also care for their own parish. We call them sort of patriotic internationalists. Dervla Murphy lived in her own town. Her father was a local librarian, but she traveled the world and brought the stories back. Norman Lewis, unlike most British travel writers who have to go to Eton and Christchurch, his father was a humble chemist in Enfield, spoke with a terrible mixture of a North London accent, which is bad, middle up with Welsh. He never gave that up, despite writing 12 books and becoming a great figure. They own who they are, they work in their own community, and they have that broad horizon. And that's our perfect balance we try and search for.
Yes, and you might think we're not talking about the Sunnah and the Shia yet. We will do, but this is all part of the background that you have to have in order to see the whole question of it in the right context. I wanted to talk about, just for a minute, a couple of the books you've published, which I'm fond of, partly because I've written chapters. One of them was called Meetings with Remarkable Muslims.
You contributed a chapter to that. That was our reaction to the sort of wave of Islamophobia that took over the West. And we just decided to do what I think is now called subaltern histories. No one was allowed to talk about presidents, ministers, people of power, just useful encounters with Muslims, their neighbors. And we got a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen writers just to quickly write about friendship without politics.
Yeah, and the remarkable Muslim that I chose was the late Dr. I.G. Khan of Aligarh, who was very sadly murdered. He was a socialist Sufi, and he really was a living saint. I don't know if any of you have been to Aligarh or studied there, knew him, but he was a great man. And I thank you, Barnaby, for the opportunity to perpetuate his memory. So, Remarkable Muslims. Another one was our book about the man you called a Kim for our times. A Kim for our times. Kim, I suppose in India, the name Kim sums up various images, but this man, Bruce Wannell, perhaps you can...
Bruce was sort of out and out, camp, gay, extravagant character from age 7. He spoke 11 languages fluently, and he was the person who introduced me to Tim Mackintosh-Smith and to William Dalrymple. He was a brilliant scholar, but was incapable of ever finishing his own book. He had such a critically developed idea that he just liked improving our work. But he was one of those magicians who informed and empowered people through music. He was a brilliant calligrapher and epigraphist. And I had the pleasure, just before he was dying, of taking him to a conference in the Ashmolean in Oxford about sacred imagery in the world. It was an audience almost as large as this. And at the end of the weekend, practically everybody had come up to Bruce and thanked him for some contribution to their scholarship, some minor correction, some editing. And he wasn't a saint because he was a terrible man with your money and your clothing, your kitchen, whatever else. But there are good people in the world.
Also your house. He borrowed somebody's flat in Piccadilly for, I think, 6 weeks and ended staying there for 6 years, was it?
No rent was paid, but he was a very good pianist. And you would arrive in your own home and there would be a wonderful sound of music. And there'd be something simmering on the stove.
A quick Bruce anecdote. He turned up in the 1994 war in Yemen, turned up at my house, and I said, well, come and stay. And we talked about Arabic, and I realized he was a Persian scholar, and I said, what about Arabic? And he said, oh, I have a little kitchen Arabic. And then he pulled a book off a bookshelf and began looking at a pre-Islamic poem and said, shouldn't the Hamzat al-Wasl on that alif be a Hamzat al-Qat'? And I said, Bruce, I thought you had a little kitchen Arabic. He really was a brilliant man.
He was a brilliant man. And one of his labors of love was working on Imam Ali's cosmography. He spent the whole of his life just trying to translate one essay. So he was always very shocked when I produce a book every other year. He was in...
Which brings us onto your books. We are getting there. Now, Barnaby has written a biography of the Prophet Mohammed, which is obviously a huge undertaking, and it's something that you do, I think you have to do with love, and you obviously have to do with respect. And it's greatly admired. From there, you went on to The Heirs of the Prophet. You've written a book on the Last Crusaders, and they're all your books are written with what can I say, elegance and verve and scholarship. They're not academic, but they are scholarly, and the difference is very important.
That's very kind of you. My wife, who's here in the audience, said I write for myself.
So, and all of that brings us finally to the subject of today, which is the house divided, Sunni, Shia, and the making of the Middle East. And just to quote a few of the blurbs, Rory Stewart said that you wrote it with empathy, learning, and rare balance. Our very own William Dalrymple said that you wrote it with intimate understanding. And Ziauddin Sardar said, you've made history into a living entity. And I think that is the end goal of all historians who are worth their salt. They want to bring history alive. For me, you've written it in beautiful prose. It's what I would call in Arabic khafif dam, which means light-blooded. You never get bored by it. You're carried along by it. And you're particularly good on what I would call the sort of longue durée, those long periods of history. There's one bit where you speak about Iraqi history and you put it so beautifully in a nutshell. I think it's a couple of pages or 3 pages, and I envy you that ability. I've produced a sort of great fat thing that people have called a monster piece, but yours is slim and elegant. And
again, I have my wife to blame and to thank. This modest little book, this little hardback. I'm a publisher, so I know about deadlines, delivering the book on time to the right length. I wrote 250,000 extra words on top of this. And the publisher said, Barnaby, we paid you quite well by the standards of the business. You go back. So in the end, everybody I knew said, no, I couldn't take on this job. And my wife took a razor blade to it. And this is just a quarter the size of what I delivered. So whatever skills of brevity it has are not mine.
I didn't know. But look, can you tell us what the book's about? I mean, it's there in the title, but can you fill in some of the details?
I am a bit of a fraud. If you're looking for geopolitical wisdom, you're not going to find it here. Any guesses for the future of religion or state power, you won't find it here. But you will find someone who, as a young man, traveled a lot for the Islamic world and hit moments of enchantment and moments of real conversation. And I think one of the empowering moments in my life was as a young boy, just getting the cheapest flight, exploring early Islamic architecture in the Maghreb, in North Africa. I arrived, badly organized, in a midnight bus in this oasis in Tunisia. And I was just summoned by the sound of drums. And I walked down the street, and there, at midnight, the whole town was building a new mosque. And they asked me to join in the soup and join in and tea and chatted. And I heard that this was being built with white money. This was being built with love. No one was being paid. All the bricks were coming as a gift from the community. No state money was on board. And I'm afraid I fell in love with Islam there and then. And then, again, through my travels, what I've tried to digest in this book is not the footnotes of history, but the real conversations, the real passion. And I, again, traveling again, looking initially at art historical monuments and talking to this community in Libya. And after 3 days, they said, well, you wasted your time with us. The person you must really go and talk to is the Quranic teacher there, the quiet man without any political ambition, with modesty, teaching for free his wisdom. And it's that sort of empowered that first book, which is the same. My books are all the same. Don't bother buying this. They're all similar. I have this dream. I am almost there in Medina when the first house mosque of the Prophet Mohammed, peace be upon him, was being built. And I try and remember the simplicity of the mud brick walls, the simple palm shelter of the mihrab. And although I love Ottoman architecture and the great beauties of Iranian culture, in the end, my heart is embedded in that house mosque. And I've learned to love, although I'm an Anglican, I am, as you can hear, British. I've sort of fallen in love with the family of the Prophet Mohammed. And it's very good being British, because I'm part of this culture that knows very, very little. And so whenever I think, why am I doing this? I should be giving this task to a Muslim in Britain. There is such a steep road of learning or lack of learning, of lack of appreciation in Britain, that it powers each mission, each talk. And I have to say, without flattering you, you are the most intelligent audience I'm likely to address. I've addressed about 30 book festivals in Britain, and you have to start right from the bottom. You have to start with their history. They have no memory, no conception of anything else. People say that if you are the victor, as America is now, you can afford to forget your history. And this is the shame that I find in British audiences. They are unaware of the damage and the ignorance, and it seems to pour on further abuse on what they've done.
I've written somewhere that the only true lesson of history is that people do not learn the lessons of history. Yeah. And I think that comes across well. But read Barnaby. Thinking of your book on the Prophet, your book on the companions of the Prophet, you are sort of back there in that Medina, in that very quiet oasis city, with, as you say, with the mud walls. It's a very beautiful experience to read. But let's focus a bit more on the house divided. It's about the Sunnah and the Shia, and it's a subject that everybody talks about or wants to talk about, and people have written about. Have you made any points that you think are special or new, that come from your own thinking or analysis?
I think it's wonderful talking to a British and American audience, and the first explanation is the Shia are the party of Imam Ali, and they take notes. And then you say, but also the Sunni love Imam Ali just as much. And they honor him as the fourth caliph, and the Ottoman battle standards in which they led the defense of Islam against the Christian empires had the sword of Ali in every engagement of the Ottoman Empire, the leading Sunni empire. And so whenever I talk to a Western audience, I know I'm sowing further ignorance. But I think if there's one story I think is critical, is that memory of the last and the first great Hajj at the end of the Prophet Muhammad's life, when all the rituals are going to be repeated for the next 1400 years, the first perfect Muslim pilgrimage. And on his way back from Mecca to Medina, a long caravan journey, he stops, either this is critical, either on the 9th or the 18th day of the month of pilgrimage. And this is the difference between Sunni and Shia, as you all know better than I. And he stops at Garahum, a place where there's water to water your camels, a good place to have a camp. And it's there where he holds up his first male convert, his beloved cousin, his son-in-law, his living version of the Quran, and acclaims him as his successor. That is known and loved by both Sunni and Shia. And what is so extraordinary is the history is not debated. But what is absolutely vital to realize, after that acclamation on the pile of baggage to make a sort of rural rostrum there, the last verse, the last correction of 2 lines of the Quran was delivered to the Prophet Muhammad that night. Today, I have completed your religion for you. Which, if you are Shia, means that last action. So we're not choosing Imam Ali out of an electoral decision. It is the seal of the last word of God. And as you all know, the Quran is not like the Gospels. It's not hadith. This is the word of God recited, dictated, and written down 20 years afterwards. So if you're Shia, I'm afraid there is no choice. You are bound together in an archway. The revelation is completed with the declaration that there is going to be a successor. So that's my main statement. Imagining for a moment that you're an ignorant British audience. And then they look a bit confused. And I say the other thing you've got to try and imagine that we respect our own royal family. It goes back many thousands of years, possibly the god Odin, according to our traditions. We love the royal family. Can you imagine our respect for a royal family that has been designated by God? So if you think of the attraction of the Jacobite cause of Bonnie Prince Charlie, but you see that man had been acclaimed by Jesus as the person to protect our religion, then you're beginning to get the shiver on the back of your neck, and you realize what an imam means to the Shia. So it is not a political choice. It is
It's an emotional choice, and I think you have given the audience some of that feel. As you suggest, you might leave a British audience dead with that because they just wouldn't get it. Because people think in terms of splits, and people think in terms of conflicts. And I want to think about the cover of your book, which is, yes,
so
please hold it up.
This is not trade craft.
It's two gentlemen playing chess. And as soon as I saw that cover, I thought, oh, Barnaby, it's too ironic, it's too peaceable. It's almost too black and white, to borrow the metaphor of chess. And isn't it really all to do with conflict, with political conflict, with armed conflict? I mean, think of the Battle of Siffin, which happened not long after the Prophet's death, a few decades, it escapes me when, but it was effectively between Ali, this wonderful charismatic leader, who was eloquent, who was admired. Almost every word that he spoke was remembered with love. I mean, the one that I was thinking of and quoted to you earlier, somebody asked him, Ali, how far is it to heaven? And he said, an answer to prayer. And somebody who can come out with an answer like that has got a special charisma about him and a special touch of divinity. And the Battle of Siffin was a military fight in which perhaps as many as 60,000 were killed. That's according to al-Mas'udi, the great historian. And it was between Ali's adherents and those of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, who represented, if you like, the ancien regime, the old regime of Mecca, who were very much merchant kings. They were kind of the Medici family, and they had all the money under their control. And it was a fight between the two of them. And it was quite a close-run thing. Perhaps Ali was beginning to come out on top, and then Muawiyah said to his warriors, take Qur'ans or leaves of the Qur'an, we're not quite sure what, and bind them to your lances and go into battle like that and let God decide. At which point Ali submitted, as I remember, to human arbitration, the arbitration of two arbiters, I think, who were chosen for their godliness. So it's really to do, the beginning of it is to do, for me, with a fight between the ancien regime, the new charismatic man, between the devil you know, the jinni ta'arifa in Arabic, and between this wonderful, eloquent leader. Am I right in the beginnings of the...
You sketch it out beautifully. I, like you, have gone to the site of the Battle of Siffin and found the villagers supremely uninterested in there, and one feels a bit of a footnote, if not a nerd. But I think you've justified my cover, the suggestion of peace. And what I was particularly keen on this cover was looking at the dialogue between Islamic cultures. I didn't want a crusader. I didn't want an American tank, an evil British or French empire. I wanted to see the discourse of it. Because as well as this Sunni and Shia debate, we're looking about real politics, fought between equal powers. As you all know, that there are three great ethnic blocks of identity, being Iranian, being Arab, being Turkic. And that is like the hard wood beneath the paint layer of sort of emotional choice of who you are. And we can investigate many of those corners. But I particularly wanted my book, and the publishers complain there's not enough about Israel. And when I was interviewed by someone in Washington, D.C., they went straight to the point of the Middle East of America what's it going to do to Israel? I said, this book is not about a tiny portion of the Middle East. This is about this whole 1500-year civilization, this battle for, not battle, but this cross-threading of Turkic, Iranian, Arabic influences. And that's what we want this cover to express, and not be so interested in what empires want to do in planting battleships on land. And we have to remember, if you know the size of the British Isles, Israel, Palestine is the size of Wales. If you're used to the size of America, it's the size of the state of New Jersey. We're interested in this book in the big, broad horizon of how things fit together. And so that this question is not too long, the answer, there's an inbuilt love of the Sunni system in British culture. For some reason, we love empires. We love efficient merchant people running things. And the Sunni, the Quraysh, Muawiyah, he's almost an East India Company chairman. And he becomes Caesar Augustus. And within British civil service, the Sunni are people we can make a deal with. They understand things. They are not dreaming of heaven. They are putting things in practice. And one of the points of this book is to correct this extraordinary, which also got a little bit to do with petrodollars, is that Downing Street and the whole British establishment is leaning always towards the Arabic Sunni tradition that they're part of, and needs to be confronted a little. There were 3 good books recently on the British Muslim community, going almost parish by parish. They covered the whole Sunni thing and then forgot about the Shia community in Britain completely.
Well, thank you. I told you I'd learned a lot from your book. I'm learning from you today and from the way that you're expressing the situation.
That's a ridiculous claim. Tim Mackintosh-Smith is like a sort of icon of learning. He's the leading British Arabist. He spent half his life in Yemen. He spent the other half of his life following Ibn Battutah, the Muslim Marco Polo, around all the Muslim communities of the world, a series of 4 fantastic books of John Murray. And like Ibn Battutah, Tim was never interested in the presidents. He follows Ibn Battutah in the quest of trying to find holiness, trying to find a Muslim scholar in the 14th century who had some proper relationship with God, not the Sultan. And it is a most extraordinary achievement, which he then capped by doing his own new edition, cheaply available in paperback, of Ibn Battutah's Travel. And you thought that would be enough for 3 lifetimes. And then he's done this most extraordinary thick book for Yale University on the Arabs, which once again dodges any geopolitical analysis to make a pun a page. His delight in Arabic poetry and in the literate culture is totally infectious.
Well, that's very kind. I will say that the publishers of Arabs, Yale University Press, they kept saying to me, "Have you done the Sunnah and the Shia? Have you done the Sunnah and the Shia?" And I kept saying, well, I will do, but it's a bit of a red herring. But we'll come on to red herrings in a bit. We talked about the beginnings, the Battle of Siffin. I want to bring things right up to the present. And to me, somehow, the question of Sunnah and Shia, it's a bit like a sort of sibling rivalry, if you like, but kind of zombie sibling rivalry, if that makes sense. That it should be dead. All of this was happening 1400 years ago, and yet it still keeps getting dragged up out of the grave. Why is this?
Well, to an extent, as we all know, there was a bigger threat to the Islamic world in the 19th century. You had the Russian Empire descending from the north. You had the French and the evil British. And the real threat for the French secular republic, British godless traders, Russians with their orthodoxy. And we've been talking about genocide on many sessions in this wonderful festival. The first real genocide was in the Caucasus, when the Russian Empire was aware that the Muslim community there might join the French and British in the next round of the Crimean War. And over 4 million people were cleared out of the Caucasus. 1 million died, and that land was taken over by Christians, who were destroyed people settled in the Ottoman Empire. And to an extent, Shia and Sunni, everybody realized these are the devils on earth. We have got to combine. And we all know the great heroes of revival, even if we don't like them personally. Ataturk, the Shah, Ibn Saud, were desperately forming strength in their own communities because they knew there was another round of the battle. And we all know the First World War was that. Britain had pretended to be a friend of the Ottoman Empire for 300 years. And in the First World War, we turned ourselves into a predatory hawk, ready to rip apart the Ottoman Empire and take everything we wanted. The gold, literally the gold and the oil. You can't make up the evil of that thing. And the Sunni Shia was buried because there was a real threat against your language, your culture, your identity from these predatory powers. And that is roughly what happens until 1979. And if you're going to just grab one date to remember and to research and get back, remember that moment when the Shah goes in a helicopter ride. He was a good helicopter pilot, goes with his twin sister and looks at the crowds protesting against his regime, and their hearts die. There are millions of Iranians denouncing them, and something emotional happens. And he's ready to leave Iran in January. And then we have, in April, Bhutto, a Shiite radical leader, hung by a Sunni military man in Pakistan. And then in November, the beginning of year one of 1400, the rather forgotten rebellion in Mecca, where the very militant Wahhabi militia take over the Holy of Holy, the mosques in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabians send in their their royal guard, their secret police. They are repelled with breathless ease by these diehard militia. And they have to call on the troops of Pakistan, the Sunni hidden ally of Saudi Arabia, plus French military skill, to clear their own militia from the Holy Mosque. And on that moment, overnight, Saudi Arabia, which was a modernizing oil-rich economy, goes in complete cultural reverse and becomes a sort of Wahhabi, Salafi superpower in order to defend the monarchy. And so this is the creation of the Islamic Shiite Republic, and then Saudi Arabia becoming ultra-Wahhabi and becoming competitors, made more complicated. As we all remember on that Boxing Day, I'm just looking at people who weren't born anywhere near this, but I can remember on Boxing Day, 1979, when the 40th Russian army rolls over into Afghanistan. And that completes the physical geography of which we're still in today. That collapse of the Afghan civil war being sorted out by a secular Russian power, the competition between Shiite Islamic Republic and the Salafi Wahhabis pushing themselves out to get the leader of radicalism in Islam. And to an extent, we're still there.
So really what's the picture that's coming into my mind? Is it not one of a flat and beautiful and unified landscape with a San Andreas fault running through it and gradually widening? No, it's something different. It's something more like Ibn Khaldun talks about when he talks about the Arabs and the Turks and the sort of pendulum of history swinging backwards and forwards. And what you're suggesting to me is the idea of every action having an equal and opposite reaction, and the Sunnah Shia divide becoming magnified by these pendulum swings. And what you do is you complicate it beautifully by bringing in a third force, the Wahhabi force. So you have a sort of pendulum that swings three ways. I was going to say that Barnaby is into complexities. His title is therefore rather misleading. You are really into what I might call, I want to call very naughtily, the joy of sects. But I'm sorry, that's a cheap laugh. Or to put it nicely, you're into randomness and fractals and things like that. So, but going back, I want to take slight exception with something you said. You said Yemen's conflict is the only one that has clear sectarian roots. Now, when I went to Yemen first in the early 1980s, would you believe it? I remember getting to know a young guy. I was obviously a young guy myself at that time. And I wanted to sort of show off and say that I knew something about something, and I knew he was Zaidi. And I said, oh, you know, you Zaidis being part of the Shia sphere of things. And he kind of looked at me and said, Zaidi, oh yeah, I've heard of that. But what's the Shia? And he really hadn't heard of it, of the idea. And this was a well-educated young man. His father had been the Minister of the Interior in Yemen. And when I learned about this, I realized there had been an accommodation between the Sunnah and the Shia in Yemen. Last night I was talking to our friend Raith, who might be in the audience, and he was saying the Zaydis pray with their arms hanging down, Yusarbilu in Arabic, and the Sunnah pray like that with their arms crossed. And Raith was saying he had been to Yemen and as an Iraqi was amazed to see people in the same rows of prayer adopting these two positions. So I would say that Yemen is a place where there are sectarian differences, but they are only kind of revived, brought up from the grave in times of civil strife.
Tim, I respect your correction to my book. Tim knows the Yemen and feels the Yemen and has experienced things that none of us would wish to share. And I will tone down my affection for the Zaydi community. But in their defense, they became Shia in trying to hold on to their own domestic pride, their own schools, very light Shia tradition of the Zaydi. And they were having to suffer Salafi Wahhabi preachers coming from Saudi Arabia. And it began as a very, from my understanding, it was a very gentle, family-led upholding of their own traditions that then became increasingly aggressive and military and militarized.
You're quite right, actually. All my own Yemeni family is Zaydis, so I have no bone to pick with them at all. And there was this wonderful revival of Zaydi scholarship back in the 1990s. My old friend Bernard Heikel did his doctorate on that, and it was a fascinating time. It has become more militant since, as we all know. But just to kind of round things off, how are we for time? I talked about your emotional exposition, your exposition of the emotional side of things. And I just, thinking of all the travels I've done, I wanted to kind of give a little contrasting two places to contrast extreme Sunnism or Wahhabism, if you like, and the Shia. And I remember going to a small island in the Maldives to visit some shrines to local saints. And I got there and was taken round by the local imam, very nice guy. And I said, oh, can we go to the shrine of so-and-so? And he said, oh, we knocked it down. We demolished it. And he took me there, and sure enough, there was a kind of line of foundations and nothing else. And they had demolished their historical shrines because they believed so much that it was wrong to celebrate the pious dead. Contrasting with that, I remember going to the shrine of Sayyida Zainab in Damascus, in the outskirts of Damascus, and looking at the dome and saying, oh, that must be real gold leaf. And they said to me, no, it's real gold plates. And inside, people were sort of dragging themselves across the ground to the tomb. I saw women taking off gold bangles and posting them into donation boxes, all to celebrate this lady who was the granddaughter of the Prophet.
Those who've traveled in Iran will see those posters of a silhouette of it looks like a caravan trail if you're from the Western tradition. But everybody knows immediately you see that those are the prisoners from Karbala. And leading that is Lala Zainab, the brother of Hassan Hussein, the tomb you're describing. And you plunge back into the misery of that battle, where she saw all 72 of her family, all her males killed. And that night, the daughter of her brother was so distraught by the catastrophe that had fallen upon the descendants of the Prophet Mohammed, she searched out the corpse of her father, beheaded and besmeared with blood, and then could only sleep on the chest of her dead father And in the morning, Zainab took upon her shoulders the protection of all the surviving wounded descendants of the Prophet Mohammed, and was taken in that terrible caravan of shame to be humiliated by the Umayyad governor in Kufa, and then sent on their way to Damascus to be interviewed by the caliphs there. And some of that devotion, when you see people giving their gold in this ornate shrine, you think of glory, but the real thing is about dust and sacrifice, and that preordained dynasty who were chosen to be not so much the leaders, but the interpreters of a passionate religion that in its fulfillment, and this is the other side of the Shiite identity, was a militant socialist state. It was a royal leadership of compassion. And it said that Ali would be an impossible caliph because he wasn't interested in conquest. He was interested in creating a perfect society. And so you have this fusion. Whenever I travel in the Sunni world, people love that green map of the Umayyad Empire, dreaming again of Ummah, of this great worldwide Islamic state. On one side, the conquerors, Khalid ibn Walid, Amr ibn al-As. And on the other, my heroes are the four of Ali, the Persian Sufi dervish who wandered from Zoroastrian faith to Judaism to Christian before finding Islam, the broken slave of a slave, tortured as the early convert in Mecca, the ugly man from Hadramaut with the golden voice calling the prayer. These are the sort of the people who are humiliated by every society, and they are the four archangels of humanity chosen by Ali to be his companions.
And this is exactly why you should read Barnaby, because I gave you my outsider's view, my Martian's view of landing in Sayyidah Zainab's tomb and being surprised and amazed. He has explained to you why you see these scenes. This is exactly why you should read his book. And it's why I learned so much from it. I was going to sort of wind up. If I'm wondering if somebody's going to present us a timing.
We've got 30 seconds left.
Oh, we've got. I didn't know it was across there. I've been looking over here. But before we have questions, before we have questions, I was going to ask you a rather flippant question and say, to my mind, the Sunnah are the Roundheads and the Shia are the Cavaliers. So, Barnaby, are you a Roundhead or a Cavalier? You haven't got very much hair, but neither have I.
I haven't got much hair, and I had the good advantage of being brought up by a Catholic father and a Protestant mother. So I've learned to love Shia and Sunni. I'm both.
So do we have time for... We have no time for questions. Oh, look. Oh, there is Raith. All right. No, that's favoritism because I like him.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Tim, first I've read your book, The Arab Zone. It took me for a long time to read, but it's a great book. My question is very simple. My dad used to have a copy of Sir Richard Burton's Voyages of Mecca and Medina, which is a fascinating book. The question is slightly different. Has the magic of travel lost in this new generation? Has the magic of travel gone in this era? I mean, you people are just fascinating people. I mean, you've seen so much.
Has the magic of travel been lost in this era? Good
We're
question.
at Jaipur, not for me.
No, you're the man who knows. You publish all the best travelers.
I think as you get old, you look for some excuse to embrace the grave, and we find the world more difficult, but I still find it enchanting.
Any more, or are we out of time? Well, thank you. Just to wind up, thank you so much.